Welcome to the Marketing Behind Rapid Growth, the podcast where we explore the strategies, decisions, and growth engines behind some of the world's most successful technology companies. Today, we're talking about DocuSign. Here's a strange thought experiment. Imagine building a company on top of the wreckage of someone else's failure. Not the idea, not the team, not the customers. Just a handful of patents nobody else wanted for a technology most of the world actively distrusted. That's exactly where DocuSign began. In the early 2000s, a failed Seattle startup called DocuTouch collapsed, leaving behind almost nothing of value. Almost. Buried in the rubble were issued patents for signing documents over the internet. And one man, Cort Lorenzini, looked at those patents and saw the outline of an empire. At the time, that must have sounded delusional. Regulators didn't trust electronic signatures. Consumers didn't understand them. Enterprises treated them as a legal landmine waiting to go off. Lorenzini pursued it anyway. With backing from Tom Gonzer and alongside engineer Eric Rumpft, he founded DocuSign in 2003. And in an early pitch to investors, he made a claim that sounded almost arrogant in its confidence. He predicted this would become a winner-take-most market. His logic was simple, almost psychological. People crave consistency. Give them 10 ways to sign a document, and they'll hesitate, get confused, lose trust. Give them one reliable way, and they'll standardize around it forever. He forecast a single company would eventually capture around 70% of the market. Today, DocuSign holds a commanding majority share of the entire e-signature industry. This is a story about how that prediction came true, not through a single brilliant product feature, but through a deliberate, layered strategy where marketing and product became almost impossible to separate. Let's start with the hardest problem DocuSign ever faced. It wasn't technical, it was psychological. Anyone can build a digital checkbox. The real challenge was trust. Would a court accept this? Would a signature made with a mouse click hold up the same way ink on paper does? DocuSign had to solve for identity and consent in a way that could survive legal scrutiny, not just user experience scrutiny. Much of the early work at DocuSign wasn't engineering. It was legal groundwork. The company leaned hard on U.S. legislation, the ESIGN Act and UETA, betting the entire business on the idea that a digital signature could stand as the legal equivalent of wet ink. And then it did something almost theatrical to prove it. DocuSign staged mock trials, real attorneys, real judges, all to demonstrate in a courtroom setting that its encrypted audit logs would hold up as admissible, tamper-evident evidence. That's not a marketing campaign in the traditional sense. That's building credibility from the ground up, one skeptical institution at a time. But credibility alone doesn't create rapid growth. Distribution does. And this is where DocuSign's story gets genuinely clever. Two moments changed everything. The first involved Microsoft. DocuSign was an early adopter of the .NET framework, and during an internal executive briefing, Microsoft's own team held up DocuSign as a cutting-edge example of what could be built on their platform. That caught the attention of Microsoft's senior legal leadership. Think about what that moment actually did. When one of the most powerful, risk-averse companies on earth embraces electronic signatures, it doesn't just validate the product. It absorbs the risk on behalf of everyone else. Suddenly, if Microsoft's legal team trusts this, why wouldn't yours? The second moment was even more strategically elegant. Instead of trying to sell to individual real estate agents one at a time, a notoriously slow and expensive process, DocuSign embedded itself directly into real estate transaction software. It won the endorsement of the National Association of Realtors, an organization representing well over 1 million agents. Here's why that mattered so much. Every time an agent sent a home purchase agreement through DocuSign, the buyer on the other end experienced the product firsthand, often for the first time, often working in a completely unrelated industry. That buyer might be a school teacher, an accountant, a small business owner. They weren't being sold to. They were simply using the product to buy a house. It was a viral campaign disguised as a software integration. The product became its own advertisement. This is a pattern worth sitting with, because it shows up again and again in companies that scale fast. The most efficient marketing isn't a campaign that talks about the product. It's a product architecture that makes the product impossible to avoid. Now, once DocuSign had trust and had distribution, the strategy had to evolve again, because a signature on its own is a fleeting event. It's a single moment in a much longer business relationship. Lorenzini had a mental image for this. Picture two giant land masses separated by a chasm. On one side, document creation tools, Word, Adobe. On the other side, the systems where business actually runs, SAP, Salesforce. Somewhere in between, a signature happens, and then the data generated by that signature needs to travel from the creators to the executors. DocuSign's next move was to stop thinking of itself purely as the signing tool and start becoming the bridge across that chasm. While competitors were busy polishing their interfaces, DocuSign was quietly investing in something far less glamorous but far more defensible, robust APIs. Deep plumbing that connected into customers' CRM, HR, and ERP systems. This is the part of the story that explains why DocuSign has been so hard to dislodge. By the time a competitor tried to compete on signature quality alone, DocuSign was already woven into the operational fabric of its customers' businesses. Switching away didn't mean picking a new app. It meant re-engineering an entire workflow. The moat was never the signature itself. It was the integration underneath it. By 2020, DocuSign had achieved something remarkably rare for a business software company. It had become a verb. People didn't say, let's send this for electronic signature. They said, let's DocuSign it. Then the pandemic hit, and DocuSign's market capitalization soared, peaking near $60 billion in 2021. On paper, this looks like the happiest chapter in the story. In practice, it planted a dangerous seed. Current CEO Alan Thygesen has described this period candidly. In some ways, the company fell asleep during the boom. Sales reps became order takers, simply processing incoming demand rather than pursuing it. Engineering wasn't focused on innovation so much as keeping the servers from melting under the load. When the world reopened and that artificial tailwind faded, DocuSign ran directly into a problem that many category leaders eventually face. The market had filed it away permanently as the e-signature company. And e-signature, the very category DocuSign had pioneered, was rapidly becoming a commodity. Success had built a ceiling, and escaping that ceiling would require deliberate, uncomfortable change. This is where Thygesen enters the story more directly. He joined in 2022 after running Google's advertising business across the Americas, and he drove a fundamental reorganization of the company's identity. His insight was sharp. DocuSign had digitized the asset, the signed agreement itself, but it had never really solved the problem of what happens after signing. Once a contract was executed, it tended to vanish into the digital equivalent of a filing cabinet in the basement. Nobody could search it. Nobody could act on it. The roadmap he built pointed towards something called Intelligent Agreement Management, or IAM. This wasn't a cosmetic rebrand. It was a shift from a sales-led organization to a product innovation-led one, aimed squarely at a problem DocuSign estimates costs the world trillions of dollars in value lost to poorly managed agreements. And the engine behind this new chapter is AI. But DocuSign's pitch here is specific, and it's worth understanding why it matters. General-purpose AI models train on the public internet. DocuSign's argument is that it holds something no public model can access: visibility into hundreds of millions of real, consented agreements. Through acquisitions of contract analytics specialists, Seal Software in 2020 and Lexion in 2024, DocuSign built an agreement-specific AI engine it calls Iris, named after the flower long associated with wisdom and trust. The company claims Iris delivers meaningfully higher precision on legal and business agreements than general-purpose models, roughly 15% by its own measure, with human oversight built in to limit hallucinations. The pitch to customers is direct and practical: search thousands of contracts in seconds to surface hidden risk or renewal leverage that would otherwise sit buried and invisible. But building the technology was only half the challenge. The other half was marketing. Moving the market's perception from e-signature company to agreement management platform required a complete shift in language, from transactional messaging to contextual storytelling. Instead of talking about the button you click to sign, DocuSign built campaigns around operational pain points: slow contract cycles, choking sales teams, procurement bottlenecks, strangling deal velocity. In other words, DocuSign stopped marketing the moment of signing and started marketing the entire workflow around it. Messaging was tailored by audience. A procurement director at a bank hears a different story than a partner at a law firm. The company also leaned into its developer ecosystem, APIs, partner tools, and its Momentum conference, encouraging outside developers to build their own applications directly on top of the IAM platform. And crucially, DocuSign wasn't trying to erase the signature from people's minds. It was using the trust built over 2 decades as the entry point into a much larger, much more valuable conversation. So what can founders and business leaders actually take from this story? First, study the failures that came before you. Lorenzini didn't invent electronic signatures. He studied why earlier attempts collapsed and built a company designed to avoid those exact mistakes. Innovation is often less about originality and more about diagnosis. Second, product-led growth can be the most powerful marketing channel you have. By embedding into Microsoft's ecosystem and the real estate industry, DocuSign turned ordinary product usage into a lead generation engine. The best marketing isn't always a campaign. Sometimes it's an integration. Third, in a world of increasingly commoditized AI, proprietary data is the real advantage. DocuSign's accuracy claims rest on a corpus of consented agreements that no general-purpose model can touch. That's not a feature, that's a moat. And fourth, success can be dangerous. The pandemic boom nearly cost DocuSign its next decade of relevance. When growth becomes easy, organizations quietly stop learning. Restarting that engine takes real leadership, especially when the financial numbers still look fine on the surface. DocuSign began as a bet on a handful of patents and a bold prediction about human psychology. It survived by solving an almost invisible trust problem. It scaled by building the connective tissue between disconnected systems. And now it's fighting to reinvent itself again, not as the company that lets you sign documents, but as the intelligence layer that makes those documents worth signing in the first place. The through line across all of it is simple. Durable growth rarely comes from one clever feature. It comes from the interplay between product strategy, which builds the moat, and marketing strategy, which defines the category the world believes you belong to. This was The Marketing Behind Rapid Growth. See you in the next episode.